Good morning. Thank you, Patsy. I am a professor, but I'm not speaking to you today as a professor. Am I able to use the mic now?
Yeah, you're good.
Great. I'm going to try. Let me try this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In many ways, I'm in the same boat. Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm speaking to you as someone who is an artist and also a writer, but more than that, as someone who's in the same boat as you are. In fact, I'm about to teach am I in the dark right here? I'm about to teach a 300 student class of students just out of high school. And I'm trying to introduce them to the novel and get them interested in that. So in many ways, I feel like we're kind of on the same ground here. And in fact, one of the first things I'm going to do in that class is ask them all to come down and sit in the front. I noticed you're just like the students, sitting in the back, hiding out in the dark back there. And the reason I do that, and it relates to what happens in the gallery space or in the exhibition space, is that what you want to do is have a conversation, right? You don't want to lecture to someone. You don't want to talk, certainly not talk down to them, but you don't even just want to fill them with information. You want it to be a conversation, always. And that's the way I run any kind of room, any kind of classroom. And indeed, that's the way I'd like to do this here today. And in fact, I wouldn't mind if the lights came up a little bit on the whole space so that I could see some of you. That would be perfectly fine. I think it seems to me that your goal, one of the first goals, and by the way, so I'm going to share some thoughts with you today that I've had about the show. That's much better. Great. I'm going to share thoughts with you in the beginning, just kind of some general thematic thoughts, but then I want to look at some pieces. And I think I'll throw a lot at you in a way, but feel free to interrupt me at any time and kind of engage with me and ask. Let's try to make this a conversation, really. But the other thing I want to say is that some things will strike you, and you might want to take note of them, and maybe it can prove useful to you. So it's perfectly fine to kind of cherry pick what will be helpful to you in the way that you engage with visitors, right? And that's the same way that I encourage anybody, a student, what's going to be useful to them in their work and their understanding of something. The first thing I want to say is that, before I even talk about the quote on the wall, which I'll explain in a second, is that your goal is to encourage a visitor to give the work what it demands. Right? Because the reward for that, I mean, they won't realize the reward if they don't kind of open themselves up to it. And I also want to say that this is the kind of work that even if somebody comes in and spends time with one piece on one day, that's okay. It's that kind of work, because they can have an experience with that one piece that can be very profound. It's not the kind of show that you need to go through everything and understand every piece. And in fact, understanding the pieces may not even be the goal of this kind of show. And I'll talk more about that in a second. What does this work demand? And here is kind of why I put this Virginia Woolf. So Virginia Woolf was defending Henry James here a bit. And she said, to enjoy his power of exquisite selection, one must have lived and loved and cursed and floundered and enjoyed and suffered, and with the appetite of a giant have swallowed the whole. Right? The first thing I want to say is that this is an artist who makes an entire body of work, or her entire process is one of selection. She selects objects. She selects things from the kind of already existing world. And she manipulates them. She takes things away from them. She alters them. She puts them together. So selection and choice is hugely important to the kind of poetics, the poetic quality of her work. But the other part of this quote is really about what you're trying to encourage in the visitor to the exhibition. and what the work asks of them. This is not cerebral work that you come to and you say, you have some kind of intelligent, intellectual, because you know so much about things in the art world that you somehow figure out how clever this work is. It's something, I mean, I think this is such a great choice for this museum because this work actually speaks to that which is most important to anyone. I think that's the special quality, and very rare, I want to say. I used to be very much a participant in the contemporary art world. And Valeska Soares' work, I mean, she's rare because she speaks about love. She speaks about memory. Her work is about loss. It's about desire and longing and connecting all those things. More than anything else, is time and language. Okay, so the connective thread, or threads of all the work, are time and language. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, let's just begin with language. Language is that medium through which all those other things, we do all those other things. We love through language, right? We feel through language. We miss someone through language. We long for them through language. We can't bring them back in language. Time is the other thing, that which we can't escape. We find it almost intolerable that those who are most precious to us are subject to time. Right? How is it that the cat you just got, you got at the shelter, how is it that they weren't always in your life? It seems almost impossible that something you love so much wasn't there 7 years ago. Right? How could I not have known this person my entire life? And on the more flip side, the back end of that, how is it that they're gone? Right? It's because we're in time that these things are true. And then, if we think about things like desire and obsession, time becomes something that is almost unendurable and violent. Right? We want it to stop at all costs. Or, paradoxically, and this is the strange thing about being a human, we want it never to stop. Okay? So the pain that we suffer when we love that which we can't have, let's say, sometimes we don't want it to stop. And it's that kind of contradiction that all of Soares' work points us to. Because those kinds of contradictions actually constitute what we call the real, or reality. Right? So let me, how do I do this? Yeah. What I want to say, as we first look at this piece on rest, is that this work is presentational. Okay? It presents us with something. And it's almost like we're being dropped into a city. And that's one reason I have Calvino's quotes here, which we'll read in a second. But when you visit a new city, it seems strange to you. It can be easy enough to kind of look at it, to be pleasant. It's filled with details and patterns, and yet we don't understand it yet. We don't know what the meaning of the city is. Let's read a couple of Calvino's quotes, and I need to say that Calvino is one of the crucial and fundamental writers for Valeska Soares. And we'll see in a second why. Arriving at each new city, the traveler finds again a past of his, or hers, that he or she did not know he had. The foreignness of what you no longer are, or no longer possess, lies in wait for you in foreign, unpossessed places. Right, so this is the city posited as this mysterious thing that somehow has to do with our own self and our own past. Something deep within us that we're going to learn about ourselves as we navigate through the city. And this is what this work does. It drops us into the middle of a complicated city, a complicated town. I think of a city like Fez, you know, if you've ever been to Morocco. And it's a type of labyrinth. All cities are a type of labyrinth. And we're going to speak first, later, well, I might as well talk about it now. Another writer who's deeply important to Valeska is Borges. And Borges very famously writes about the labyrinths and puzzles. Because the self is a puzzle, right? We understand now, through various great thinkers and even contemporary psychology, that we are often unknowable, that we have many layers. And this is work that engages the many layers of who we are. Okay? Let's read the other Calvino quote. With cities, it is as with dreams. Everything imaginable can be dreamed. But even the most unexpected dream is a rebus that conceals a desire, or its reverse, a fear. Cities, like dreams, are made of desires and fears, even if the thread of their discourse, their language, is secret. Their rules are absurd, their perspectives deceitful, and everything conceals something else. So again, we don't go into an exhibition like this with Google Maps, right? There's nothing, but that's kind of, in a way, your task is to kind of function as the assistant, a sort of a Google Maps type of app, right? Let's look at what Valeska says here. It's like reading a book. When you read, you imagine the lives described and you create them in your mind, right? So when you're reading a book, it's an active kind of co-creation. You're creating the reality with the book, right? Objects are the same, she says. They're a source of imagery, poetry, and ideas. They accumulate so much life, but their stories are a multitude of secrets. And now is a good time for me, before we even talk about unrest, although I can do it at the same time, to share with you a couple of personal stories. See, when I was probably about 4 or 5, I was in my grandmother's house, and she had one of these footstools. You know, and I'd never seen one before. It was very much, actually, like this one or this one. And I was fascinated with this thing. I didn't understand what it was. And yet I sensed that it had something to do with my body. You know, and I kind of played with it, and eventually I turned it over. And written, scrawled in crayon on the back of it was Butch. It said Butch. And I realized this was my uncle, who was by then to me, a very old man. I mean, he was probably younger than me at this point. He was probably 45. But Butch, and that had been written back in probably, 1949 or something. And so, but by encountering this piece of furniture with Butch written on the body, concealed, so there was the secret that this furniture had, right? And then it forced me to imagine my uncle, this older guy, took me to Disneyland and stuff, as a boy, right? So I became Butch in interacting with this piece of furniture. And it became very important to me, and I kept looking at that, I kept turning this, over the years, I would turn Butch over. And I love this sense of imagining my way back into time, right? Back into the 50s, as he was growing up. All because of this footstool. Okay, so that's one story I want to tell. The other story is very personal, but I'll share it with you. I have a pillow, a down pillow that was my grandmother's. And I have now for 3 decades used it as an eye patch. I have to have it with me. And I put it over my face. And I cannot sleep without it. And it's gone with me to Krakow, to Bucharest, to Berlin. It's about to go with me to Spain, It's here in Santa Barbara with me right now. And so this is my grandmother's pillow. It's a down pillow. And it's become part of my body and part of my sleep, and it's part of my dreams. That's what I want to say. It's part of my dreams. I can't dream without that thing. So objects, Soares is absolutely right, that objects have stories. They have narratives. They tell us things. They have secret lives. And there are lives. Those are our lives there. Okay? So let's talk about unrest just for a second. It's kind of backwards. I wish the slide was reversed. But at any rate, when the visitor enters the gallery, it's usually, hopefully, at the other end. I think that's the way it's set up. And at the beginning of the piece, it's very wide. It's as wide as the stage. You know, it's like these chairs here. And then it narrows as it goes into this crescent toward the terminus here. And that perspective invites us in. It invites the visitor in. And yet, the pieces are so close together, nobody can walk. You can't pick your way through it. Or if you did, you'd ruin the piece and get in trouble and get kicked out of the museum. Right? But the piece invites us in, and yet it denies us. Okay? And so that's one thing I want to start to talk about, is this push and pull that every single piece that Valeska makes has. They attract us. They invite us in, and they also resist us, and they push us away. Okay? And I want to say that the work is a lot like people, and it's a lot like the way life is. Right? On any given day, just think about any day that you're alive. The day can be comical, it can be tragic, it can be, you can have a moment of where you look up at the hills here and you just think, this is the best thing ever, this is the best, I'm in the best spot on earth. What a glorious light, look at that hummingbird. And then you find out that somebody's ill and everything changes, right? This is how our life goes. And I think that this artwork honors that kind of contradictory and paradoxical terrain, which really is the terrain of our inner lives and what we might call the soul, right? The external world seems very highly rational. We operate in a rational world according to reason. But inside, we're much more chaotic. We're much more kind of subject to these vacillations and to these contradictions. So, at any rate, the other thing about the work is that the pieces themselves make us think of our own, and I think that this is something to say to visitors, is to encourage them to think about, do these pieces bring up memories? Do they trigger something? This is a word, by the way, trigger, the verb to trigger, that is very important to this artist. She means her work to trigger an emotional response in the visitor. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. This is not a cerebral work where you say, oh, I get it. There's something to be gotten. That's not how this work this operates on us. It's much better to be, like the Virginia Woolf quote, to try to encourage viewers in whatever way you can, and to be very subtle, but to be more open and vulnerable to the work, to bring their own lives. So this is where it gets into a funny thing. We were talking last night about that idea that when people bring something personal, but it's not quite the right thing. Like they're looking at a Chagall and they say, "Oh, I once had a rooster. I once had a chicken. There's a chicken in that painting. I had a chicken." And the problem with that kind of, we might call it just thinking about the self or narcissism, whatever. But it doesn't mean much. So, okay, so I had a chicken,
What if that chicken was really important?
Well, yeah, who said that? Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've had a chicken that was, I once had a chicken named Espresso, and a hawk came down, and the chicken was gone, okay? And my life ended for about, I kid you not, for about 12 hours. Because I was so deaf. All I could do was imagine Espresso being disemboweled up in the nest, And then I heard this little peeping. And what happened was Espresso had wedged herself in. This chicken managed to get its body into a crack in a boulder this size for 12 straight hours and froze, but was alive and came back out. And it was the best moment of my... When that chicken came out, I was just like this. So chickens are okay. But what I want to bring back though to that idea of, you know, I think a lot of us have these experiences, usually in things like in houses like our grandparents' house, where when you're a child, you haven't been told yet that furniture is just this functional stuff that we sit on, you know, or all the antiques, all the grown-up stuff. Furniture is part of everything is alive, you know, and you interact. You get under the piano and what's going on under this piano, and you have some kind of experience there, and maybe you make a little modification you shouldn't have made, or, you know, if you're listening to some conversation, you hear something and you forever associate that with being with the texture of the piano leg, or the sound of the piano, or you're under the dining room table as a child, you're hiding out. And those things stay with us our entire lives. And that's the other thing about this work that was shocking to me and surprising, is this work says to us, no detail is ever lost in our lives. It comes back to us, right? And this work triggers, it brings it back. And things come back to us all the time, but they usually come back in different form, right? They come back in unexpected ways. That's also what it means to be alive and to be human. And that's what's so lovely about work like this, if we will open ourselves up to it. Right? I mean, each of these pieces, because it's a piece of furniture, and it has to do with feet, supposedly anyway, it also evokes people and figures in the body who aren't there. So there's this kind of sense of absence. These are all meant for human figures, but there are no human figures here. So I want to also get you used to that idea of absence. Okay, what's not there, and that's something else that you can kind of encourage visitors. At any rate, so there's also this, like, if we think about the title is unrest. So we think about rest, and that's the footstools kind of do evoke this sense of, I mean, not only the historical kind of things, how many people really have these anymore, but that's also, we rest our feet on them, right? There's something restful about them, and yet there's this prefix, unrest, right? And again, it's this kind of, Valeska never lets us off the hook. She doesn't just let us have this kind of, it's not a Hallmark card commercial, right? She always says to us, yeah, life is beautiful, but within that beauty there's terror, and there's loss, and there's death, and there's all kinds of other things, right? There's the light and the dark. So unrest, and indeed, if we follow this to its end, there's the chair that one would ostensibly sit in to rest your feet on the thing, but the chair is made out of delicate glass, and the chair will break if you sit in it. Okay? Now, I think there's a lot of kind of lovely poetic thinking there. What I encourage you not to do if you're talking to someone is to do that kind of literal, to make it just seem like that's the whole meaning and it's kind of clever and da-dum-dum. You know, you don't want that kind of interpretation. You want somebody to go away with all kinds of associations. That's another thing I want to say about Valeska Soares' work, is that she works associatively, okay? She associates one thing with the next, but she also works dissociatively. What do I mean by dissociatively? Does anybody have an idea of what I might mean by that? Dissociation? What's that?
She edits. Removes from an original context or idea.
Certainly. Yep.
Non-attachment.
What?
Non-attachment.
Non-attachment? Yeah. But it's all. You keep trying to say something. Go ahead. What is it?
Free floating?
Free float, yeah. I think what you mean is kind of free association. And what happens when you dissociate is you put two objects together that don't belong together. Okay? Most of our lives are dominated, again, as I said earlier, by reason and rational thinking. And so we associate one thing with the next in a very ordered way. What this work does is it disrupts that. Okay? It disassociates. And so I mean, even in this piece, it does have a beautiful composition. And yet we've never seen footstools put together like this. And in this shape, and leading us on a yellow brick road, it almost seems like. But the yellow brick road leads to this kind of dangerous, fragile thing at the end that is kind of haunting, right? And so, but just to kind of go back to what I was saying a second ago, you want your viewers, your visitors, whoever you're talking to have all these different layers of association and even dissociation. Any questions about that? It's a tall order. Believe me, I know.
Can I suggest something?
Yes. Yeah.
The unrest made me think about some of these stools very often were used not for the feet, but for the knees next to the bed. For saying one's prayers prior to going to sleep.
No.
And climbing into what were very tall beds.
Tall beds, yeah.
And that the unrest was to assure your path towards the seat of God.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
And it was not always a comfortable journey.
Yeah. I love that, and it's a funny thing because I didn't get to meet Valeska this time, but in a lot of her work, I thought I felt and detected spiritual, if not religious, currents. So I think it's perfectly appropriate and right that you bring up that kind of association. Yeah. Yes.
I also was struck by just a number of disassociations, but one that I'll just mention here was footstools leading to a chair. Well, they're similar, they kind of group together, but they're very dissimilar. She could have done a glass or a crystal footstool.
That's
but
true.
She chose a chair.
Yes.
And that struck me again as, yes, similar, and they kind of do go together, but it was jarring to my brain. Well, why don't you switch to a chair? And I felt that.
Right. So while we're on that, I want to mention one other thing, which is that these pieces not only trigger things that we remember, they not only trigger memories, but they seem to trigger memories of things that haven't happened to us. Do you see what I'm saying? And so there's this dreamlike aspect, and yet they seem like a memory. So it seems like they evoke a memory of something that hasn't happened to us. A memory we really haven't had, and yet it feels like a memory. Isn't that, I mean, I find that incredible, yeah.
One word you have not used, and it surprises me, conceptual art, and we've had many, many such exhibits.
Yeah.
I just saw the Rauschenberg show at MoMA in New York. I mean, it's full of disassociative objects. I mean, this is not new. I mean, hello, Freud started this before the 19th century.
But I would connect, so I have a lot to say in response. I'm glad you brought it up. I think that this work actually, it jumps over Rauschenberg and a lot of that other work right to Freud. I think it's no accident that she loves Roland Barthes' A Lover's Discourse. I should say this is a good moment to say something about that book. That book is so deeply important to her, and indeed to a lot of artists. And what that book is that's Barthes basically taking notes of the writers who have meant the most to him, okay? And he's processing his favorite writers through love and through his concerns with love. And he's taking notes, and then he kind of organizes the notes into different chapters, and that's the book, okay? And Freud is enormous in that book. Freud is, and indeed, important to this writer. I will just say that I think that this work more than Rauschenberg, more than some of that other work, actually more directly engages our dreams and our memories. I don't like the word conceptual art, even though I came out of that world. I don't even know what that. When I hear conceptual art, I just go to sleep. I don't know what that means. It just doesn't mean anything to me. But I do know that if I look at this, I can have an emotional response to it, and that's the level that I think we want to think about with visitors to the show, right? The work should speak to everyone, not just to people who understand conceptual art. Yeah.
I'm thinking about taking children to see this, and children who may never in their life have seen a footstool. And I think it would be fascinating to just say, what do you see here? What's going on?
Yeah.
It would be wonderful.
Yeah, and let me tell you something Henry James said. He said, listen, our lives are a story. Our lives are a narrative. But he said, really though, what the story of our lives is one of, he used this lovely old word that we don't use anymore called muddlement. Muddlement. Isn't that a great word? Muddlement. By which he meant, of course, confusion, or bewilderment, which I think is a slightly different meaning. So we're kind of caught in this muddlement in our lives. And he said, great art understands that half of good art is the muddlement part. Okay? It acknowledges that we're all caught in this muddlement and that we spend our lives trying to find some clarity in the muddlement, trying to work our way towards some understanding through our intelligence, right? And seeing what the path and the kind of shape of our life is. That's what great art does, he says. And I think but what he says is, if the artwork is too clever, this is to go back to you, if the artwork is too clever and it understands everything, which is basically we call an omniscient point of view, right? If the artwork knows everything, it's weak art. It's not good art, because it's not like us. It's not like how life is. Who of us has the omniscient point of view and has absolute clarity on the muddlement that is our fate? Who of us? But so art acknowledges that, and indeed, if it offers us any comfort at all, it's that it tells us that it kind of reflects to us the condition that we're in. And we can, through great art sometimes, we can have these flickers, these moments of insight. And that's the other thing I want to say about Soares' work, and, even as we move on, is that, and really about your task in a way, is if you have good luck, the person viewing the work might have this moment where an aperture suddenly dilates. And it shows them a new perspective, either on their own life or on reality. Right? And that's the dream part, the memory part, these triggers that this work uses. If somebody can have some moment where they suddenly see some new aspect, a new view onto things, then you'll have succeeded in spades, right? Good luck. It's really hard to see this piece, but I bet you've all seen it in the show. And I believe it's more of an oval at this point, yeah. So this is 4-2, and I love this piece. And, I'm now a novelist, so I write books, and it's so interesting to face a piece like this because you work for 5 years, 6 years on a book, right? And then at the very end, and I think it was Patsy might have brought this up, that you only do the dedication page at the very end. So the thing that the reader of a book sees first is what the author did last. So there's already this reversal of time that happens with this work. The other thing is that, what Valeska's done is removed all that labor. She's removed, each of these was a book that probably took years to write. And all we have is the dedication page left. And so, but through that kind of process of subtraction, she creates something new, right? So this is another thing that you can talk about with people, is how removing something creates more meaning. Okay, subtraction leads to more. So all we have is the dedication pages, and each of them, much more than in this image, if you'll recall in the show itself, are aging at different rates. So the pages, some of them are yellow, some are almost brown, some are still white. And she's arranged them in a very beautiful, seductive way, so that when we first walk into that room, we're kind of seduced, and it's that Soares type of thing. She pulls us in because it's this gorgeous, almost geometric pattern, right? And something about, I don't understand, it has something to do with our body and our eyes and the retinal qualities, but we love patterns, humans. Maybe it's because our lives are a muddlement. And we love patterns. And so we come in and we think, oh, this is pretty. And then we get close. And then we see, oh, each of these is dedicated to a person who is almost surely gone from the world, because they're very old books that these are pulled from. First editions from the last century, the century before. And so, again, we have this thing of the passage of time, the loss of love. I mean, what are on these pages? That which was most important to that author, the person that mattered the most to them. And I was telling a story a couple days ago in a thing we were filming here, that I know of some authors who had an idea of who they were going to dedicate their book to, and in fact even wrote the dedication the whole time they were writing the book. It was there in the Word document or whatever. And then by the time the book was completed, that relationship was over. Divorce, and there was a new person. Either one of their kids or someone, a parent. But it's very moving to stand close and to read and to see the names. Just to see the names. It's like being at a memorial. It reminded me, I brought it up, it's a funny association, but these things happen. I thought of the Vietnam War Memorial, and all because these are the dead, in a way. And all these names, and I think about it, you read a name and it does something to you. And names have a specificity to them, right? They have their own life, they have their own resonance with us and their own associations. So again, a highly resonant work that is kind of sending out all kinds of things to an open viewer. There's also that other element in here that I alluded to that's in Soares' work, which is decay and kind of falling up, things decomposing. All right? So she seduces us, but then she also kind of pushes us away a little bit with these kind of difficult associations like decay. Yeah. Let's see what this quote is here. I chose, Pessoa was Portuguese, so she's from Brazil. Soares is from Brazil. But this is the greatest poet in the Portuguese language. Fernando, the way they say it is Pessoa. Pessoa. And one of my favorite writers, actually. Let's see what he says. The dreamer should seek pleasure in pain. Okay, so right away, I'm going to stop right there. You get that contradiction, right? Pleasure and pain. And I thought when I first I had already read enough. I knew this quote was a good one for Valeska. And then learn how to feel pain falsely. It's an interesting maneuver Pessoa is asking us to do here. To feel some kind of pleasure, that is, whenever he feels pain. We need to create an inner sadism, completely masochistic, that enjoys its suffering as if it were someone else's. And this is so Portuguese, I cannot tell you. If anybody knows Fado, the blues music from Lisbon, it's a deep, soulful music that is kind of lamenting the difficulty of life. And so this is Pessoa's solution. This is like his stoic solution to somehow grappling with loneliness and pain. Pessoa was a real character, and if any of you ever go to Lisbon or you've been there, he's a big figure. You can't go through that city without seeing Pessoa referenced. He lived alone in a little apartment his whole life, and he would just kind of go around the block every day, and he never left that little area. And all of his life was in his head. And he imagined whole realms. In fact, he had made up 250 personas that he wrote under, each one with its own characteristics. And his greatest book is a collection of all his notes from that. It's called The Book of Disquiet. But at any rate, his solution to pain of being alone or of not being with a lover is to try to enjoy his suffering as if it were someone else's. And so that's what he would do. He'd sit at his window and watch lovers walking by, or he'd go to the river and watch young lovers embracing, and he would kind of feel a bittersweetness and project himself into their happiness. And I think that that's something that is very much part of this work. This work is not doesn't shy away from those qualities of being alive and of loving. When I first saw this show and I started thinking about it, and I saw these framed pieces on the wall called edits, I thought, is that, I didn't know if I liked it, I didn't know if it was powerful or anything. But then, when you get close up and you start understanding what this is, it really becomes something. So I think there is, for you as docents, an opportunity with this whole series called Edits, which you probably saw in the hallways and things. There really is an opportunity to have some nice conversations with people. And what this is Valeska has taken her favorite book, A Lover's Discourse, and she has redacted most of it. Okay? So again, this idea of subtraction, of removal, denial, pushing away, and yet all of those things as additive and as positive. Let's see why. Let's see what happens. So in the chapter Waiting, I can't read it. It's very hard for me to read. Maybe I can read it on here. Let's see if I can read it on here. I can try. Waiting. I am waiting for an arrival, a return, a promised sign. Very good. 2. There is a scenography of waiting. I organize it, manipulate it, cut out a portion of time. And then the next one I cannot possibly read. Can you read it?
Well, yeah, waiting is
Hey, once and readers.
Yeah. But what I want to say, what Valeska has done is she's created a new poem. A new poem. And it's a poem of desire and longing and love. In this case, for the beloved who isn't there. So it's about the absence of the beloved. And so what you have then is a melding or a coming together of a formal quality of absence, which is the black, right, the redaction, and the content of the work, which is the lover is absent. Okay? And so the work formally mimics what it's about. Okay? Is everybody following me on that? Yeah. And she's created an epic poem out of this book that she loves. By destroying the book, she creates the book. She creates a new book. Yeah. And that these kind of activities, the palimpsest, do you know that lovely word, palimpsest? Right? Cities, by the way, to go back to Calvino, a city is a type of palimpsest. Right? A city constantly erases itself. Not so much Santa Barbara, maybe. Yeah.
Could you spell that, please?
Palimpsest?
Yes.
P-A-L-I-M-P-S-E-S-T. Look it up. Make that word a part of your life. Because it is a part of your life. Our lives are palimpsests in a way. Originally it was on, I believe it was on papyrus, or when they would write text and then they'd erase it and write more.
Clay tablets.
Huh?
And clay tablets.
Clay tablets, exactly. Yeah. But in our fervor for progress, of course, we've turned our own environments into palimpsests by tearing down beautiful buildings. I was just talking to somebody the other day about Penn Station in New York, Pennsylvania Station. The greatest tragedy, perhaps, in all of America was the tearing down of that station to build Madison Square Garden. Right? Arguably the most beautiful train station in the world was torn down in the name of progress. Talk about a palimpsest. But in this case, it's about love. Our love lives, in some ways, can be palimpsests too. Right? How is it that we can love somebody so much, and then that can go away, and then we think we can never love again, but then we do. I just wanted to share with you a quote by two of my favorite writers, because this piece made me think of them. May I read you something? Sure. Emerson. You guys know this dude named Emerson? Emerson, yeah. It's so funny because I say that to my students and they don't they don't know who Paul McCartney is. They don't know who Emerson is. Emerson says that a thread runs through all things. All worlds are strung on it as beads. And men and events and life come to us only because of that thread. And there's something about this work that kind of evokes that. And I think it's probably the fact that the work is ultimately about time and language. So in this case, I would say that the thread is time and language. The thread of this work. The thread of our lives. And then my other favorite writer, you may or may not have heard of her. She was probably the last real saint, certainly of the 20th century. Her name was Simone Weil. To lose someone, she writes, we suffer because the departed, the absent, has become something imaginary and unreal. Okay? The departed, the person who isn't there, has become imaginary and unreal. But she says, she goes on to say, but our desire for them is not imaginary. Right? Isn't that beautiful? Our desire for them is not imaginary. And so then she advises us to go down into ourselves, to the abode of the desire, which is not imaginary. The presence of the one who's not there, of the gone, is imaginary, but their absence is very real. And henceforward, or after that, this is their way of appearing. Okay? Their absence is their way of appearing, is what she's saying. Because the absence is real. I can read that and carry that with me the rest of my life. That it's like a great work of art, that quote, because it actually is doing what Valeska's work is doing. The absence is a presence. It's those black spaces are bringing forward something.
That's the new thing we talked about in space with art.
Yeah.
How space is.
Yes.
Is actual.
Yeah, and it's in everything. It's in music, right? Music uses silences. People don't talk about it that much. These are two pieces I love quite a bit from the show. Et a Prey, which is the top. So these are bedboards, right? Marbleized, and then you have one of the duet pieces. And here I think. Let's read the quotes first. So Beckett once wrote to Sioran, who's a writer I admire very much. He's in a letter. He said, Sioran, in your ruins I find shelter. Okay. Now Sioran was a very difficult writer who said a lot of things that upset people. But Beckett said, in your ruins I find shelter. That's such a profound thing to say. And it made me, I couldn't help but think of that quote with with this work, and I'll tell you why in a second. The other one is from that poem that Patsy was talking about, from Borges. Being with you or without you is how I measure my time. And that, to me, relates to the Simone Weil quote I just read to you as well. But I hope you're seeing a pattern, even with the Emerson. Everything is connected by threads, absences, presences, time connected to love. Love, you can't separate love and time. So, again, here we have Valeska. There's both, I want to say, a great delicacy to this work. There's something very delicate about it. The pillows, the white, and the beds, and we think about love. We think about the sharing of a bed. We think about the erotic. We think about, but then we think about other things. We think about the deathbed, right? We think about time passing. And when we realize what they're made of, marble, you can't help but think about, well, why do we make things out of marble? Yeah, to keep forever, right? So we are thrown into this push and pull again between the ephemeral love. I mean, if we look at the pillows, this seems like it was a hasty, just one morning, whoever was here got up from the pillows, maybe two lovers, and they left for the day or whatever, went to make their coffee. And yet those pillows are memorialized forever. So there's, yes.
Yeah, and looking especially at the bedboards, marble is a common material for tombstones and mausoleums.
Exactly, exactly. And the way that these are upright, and they evoke the gravestone, right? And they're leaning against the wall. And if you go look at the piece, it's harder to see here, but they're actually touching each other, slightly overlapping. So there's this evocation of, again, togetherness, tenderness, and yet also the graveyard, and indeed even a graveyard that maybe is in bad shape, because they're just leaning against the wall. If any of you have ever visited some of the Jewish graveyards in Europe, you will have seen tombstones sometimes just leaning against a tree because they were desecrated back in 1939. Right? So all kinds of associations come up here, but it's that thing of seducing us with the white and the beauty, and also the bedroom, the domestic chambers of tenderness, we might say, the bedroom, right? A very important place to every human being. And yet, marble, death, forever, eternal. Yeah, did you want to?
Most people also die in bed.
People die in beds, yeah. I don't know if you saw this movie, Amour. Has anybody seen this movie? A very difficult film to see. Very troubling but important film, I think. It's funny, I have friends who still won't see it. And I understand that. Depending on where you are in your life, you don't want to see that film. But it was about a couple who'd been together for 50 years at least. And then one of them was dying, and how they were dealing with that in Paris. A film that doesn't shy away from the reality. Most narratives and things we see, they do a gloss over something like dying. Most dying is very unreal in film and in stories. So I think that one thing to talk about to people is the courage of this artist to kind of not look away. I wanted to share one of my favorite poems with you because I just could not read it to you. This is by a Greek writer who lived in Alexandria, and down in Alexandria is in Egypt, right? Yeah. So there was a Greek. The Greeks had a diaspora all over the Mediterranean, and Cavafy was from the Greek diaspora. And he grew up in Alexandria. Let me read "Afternoon Sun" to you. This room, how well I know it. Now they're renting it and the one next to it as offices. The whole house has become an office building for agents, businessmen, companies. This room, how familiar it is. The couch was here near the door, a Turkish carpet in front of it. Close by, the shelf with 2 yellow vases. On the right, no, wait, opposite, a wardrobe with a mirror. In the middle of the table where he wrote, and the 3 big wicker chairs. Beside the window, the bed, where we made love so many times. They must still be around somewhere, those old things. Beside the window, the bed, the afternoon sun used to touch half of it. One afternoon, at 4 o'clock, we separated for a week only. And then that week became forever. I'm going to start crying. You know. And, you know, as I feel like I'm in Valeska's world here because of the furniture, the wicker chairs. You know, she has that piece, Lugar Comum, I think it's called, commonplace in Portuguese. And it's the 4 wicker chairs that are joined together. You've probably seen it. But her use of tables and, of furniture to kind of grapple with these things that matter so much to us. Time and love and loss. How could I not share with you Cavafy's great poem? So we have La Dédicace and then the eponymous piece any moment now. And I thought this was a nice quote. Memory's images, once they are fixed in words, are erased. So it's this interesting palimpsest-like statement by Calvino again. And I do want to encourage all of you, if you haven't read it, or at least to look at it, to look at Invisible Cities by Calvino. I think it'll greatly enhance your kind of, first of all, just to begin with, your own experience of this show. And to be honest, your own life. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. You won't do wrong by yourself or your visitors who read that book. I think it's in some ways more accessible, perhaps, than A Lover's Discourse. A Lover's Discourse is also a very beautiful book, but it doesn't have a narrative, it's more notes. But if you like just opening to a page randomly, A Lover's Discourse can be just sit by your bedside and you can do that each night, and that's nice too. The combination of kind of looking at those 2 books, I think, will really help you understand Valeska and where she's coming from with respect to memory and time and longing and the absence of a lover and things like that seem to matter so much to the show. So this piece is the book, A Lover's Discourse, but you know, the letters kind of all taken apart and dropped. Again, that kind of, you know, sense of ephemeral, that nothing lasts, and kind of even a book. I mean, it's amazing what, in some ways you might say Valeska does a lot of violence to books. You know? I'm kind of offended, actually. But no, it's, and that's actually a good segue into this. So the thing I think that's kind of neat to do with people as they come into the show, and this is the first thing they see, is you have this beautiful, you know, Valeska was an architect, right? A trained architect, and so she understands just exactly how close the books should be to each other to create this beautiful pattern. She also understands color. And so this is not just a random, oh, let me plop some covers on the wall. It's a really beautiful piece. It's a painting in and of itself, right, from a distance. And then we approach, and we realize that these are book covers from years gone by. That's one thing we realize. These are not contemporary book covers. So again, there's something about time that's happening here. We don't quite know yet. We're still in the muddlement period, right? We're in that middle of that maze, and we're trying to figure things out. But then we start to look at the titles, and each of the titles either has the word time in it or evokes some kind of time. You know, from here to eternity. I can't off the top of my head, and it's too small for me to see. Does anybody know some of the titles out there?
Tender is the night.
Tender is the night. Yeah.
The sun also rises.
Sun also rises. Exactly.
Finest Hour by Winston Churchill.
Yes. Great book.
One night stand.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't know if that's a great book. Doesn't quite sound like it. But I do want to say about the One Night Stand and some of the other, is I had the experience, and I hope you'll encourage your viewers to have this too, is that if they actually read the titles of these books, the titles reference our own lives, things that happen to us. So it has this double effect on us of time, history, the passing, but also our own events in our own lives. Okay? So it's another case of Valeska inviting us to open ourselves up in a way that most are really, I would argue, doesn't do. The other thing to be said is that some of these books are some of the great books. And yet Valeska, especially, I kind of put these together because in a way we might say that no matter how well something has been said, how beautifully it's been said, it needs to be said again. It needs to be said again. And, you know, by taking apart books in this way, Valeska is kind of saying we have to keep renewing things. And it doesn't matter that everything's been said, but it has to be said again. It goes away. These great books even vanish. People stop reading them. They will stop reading them. Something very profound about that. I get that feeling in libraries, you know, all these incredible books and the labor that went in there. And I have the sense, every bit of conviction, that Valeska also feels these things. She has her own archives of these books. And when you keep old books and old furniture and all kinds of old things, you're living with the past. And that can't help but have some kind of effect on you, right? We're affected by the evoked sense of history, of others that came before us. All of this work does evoke those that came before us. So the work, in a sense, all of it they are memorials. They're memorials to the past, to the present, but also to the dream life, to that which hasn't happened but seems like it did. And I would argue that that's actually how our daily lives look. That's what they look like. When we're walking down State Street, you know, to go get whatever we're getting, our minds never stop. And there's so many layers that are happening at the same time. And some of those layers are memories. Some of them are associations. Some are disassociations. Some are just imagined, but they seem so real. Right? So the work is tapping into those 5 or 6 or 7 or who knows, endless layers that make up what we call consciousness. Consciousness seems to be the best word we can kind of come up with. You know, I might also call it the soul. You know, Freud called it the psyche, or we could say that consciousness is the psyche or the soul at work. A natural positivist, or today's scientists, would say it's simply, you know, the mind, the brain, a piece of meat doing its chemical thing. Whatever your choice is, the experience of going through life is a very mysterious, unfathomable, often muddlement. And this work honors our experience much more than it talks about the kind of rational, scientific understanding of things, which really doesn't help us deal with emotions and perceptions and apprehensions. Right? In that sense, I would agree with someone like John Updike, who said, an indirect art, right? A poem, a novel, or a work of art is actually a work of precision, as opposed to a news report or a work of analysis. So Updike said, an indirect art is the more precise thing. Take it. Okay. Yeah. Are we running out of time, Patsy?
Well, this is your last slide. So
My last
perfect.
piece.
Finale is just
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I love about this piece is when you walk up to it, and when you're there with a visitor, you might point out the mirror surface. And the fact that maybe you're standing across from each other, and you see each other's bodies in the mirror. So the piece evokes those that aren't there. Fingers, figures. It's the, you know, it's the morning after. The festive thing happened already, and now we're afterward. Again, a piece that seduces us with its great beauty and its delicacy, and yet the smells coming from it can be kind of too much. It's overload. So desire, intoxication, but also something else, right? Something much more tenebrious. Yeah. I can't help but think of, I start to narrativize what happened here. We can't help but make a story out of it. Yeah. I think we'll end there. I did have a quote. This is my last thing. I just want to read this to you because I couldn't help. In his diary, this is what Franz Kafka wrote about the woman he promised he would marry and he never married her. He promised her 3 times he got engaged to her. He said, "Sometimes I thought she understood me without realizing it. For instance, the time she waited for me at the U-Bahn station, I had been longing for her unbearably, and in my passion to reach her as quickly as possible, almost ran past her, thinking she would be at the top of the stairs, and she took me quietly by the hand." And that's why did I think of that? Because I think this work actually takes us quietly by the hand, and it triggers us in a quiet way, subtle way. And it also evokes, even that last piece finale, with the glasses, these delicate glasses, fingers and fingertips, right? Softly, gently lifting things up. Well, I hope I give you some things that would help you.